the pastor that that knew in Oklahoma, and he was like, if I started to question this piece of my life, my religion, that like was the biggest piece of my whole life, what else am I like? What else is not right for me?
Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy. And guys, today is going to be a great day. We have with us here the one and only Holly Krivokopich. She's a certified courage coach who works with clients to trust themselves with what they want for their life, which, by the way, I love that. And she's the host of the very popular TV show on YouTube, Question Everything, which is a show that really talks about some challenging conversations. It's really bringing challenging conversations to the forefront.
Yes, that is it. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited.
And in person, in real life.
For those of you who don't know Holly, she is one of my very best friends, and we met very recently in our lives.
6 months ago?
6 months ago. And I love it because it's really testament to finding new relationships in your life later on in life, which is really cool to be able to find that. So thank you for honoring me with being on the show.
Yes, I was so excited when you said we were coming to visit. We planned this a couple months ago, and you were like, you have to be on my show. And so here we are. So it's so fun.
So cool. So welcome to Maine.
Thank you. Maine's been beautiful. We had one day of bad weather, which I was a little disappointed that you could not. I put that much faith in you.
I know.
I can't control the weather, but that's fine. It's amazing. It's been such a beautiful trip, and to spend time with you and your family has been the biggest treat.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I'd love you to share with our audience a little bit about. Well, first of all, I want to start with the TV show.
Okay.
Yes. Question Everything, which, by the way, the name is amazing, and it is an amazing show. And you've had some really great guests on your show.
Yeah. So I started it because from when I was young, I've been a storyteller. I was loved asking questions. I loved hearing people's stories. And that was just something I was missing in my own life. I think having those different, not in my own life, but maybe of topics that I thought maybe would make other people uncomfortable. It's let's have those. Let's hope that's in a way, if I have the courage or I have the network to open up and talk with somebody who maybe, is a Black woman or a gay man, how do I have those conversations that may make people uncomfortable? And starting to question our thoughts and our beliefs and our stereotypes, and maybe, have the courage to kind of ask those questions that I know will build so much connection in the future. But we have to kind of get through that awkwardness. So that's what we're doing.
I know. I love what you say too. You say, because when we question everything, everything changes. And that really speaks to having perspective shift. And so what is it about, as you've been doing this show, what is it about questioning that encourages us to have a new perspective or just to see something from a different angle?
I love that question because question. And I think, it's when a statement can be a fact. There's a period. It ends. That's that. Right. Yeah. But that questioning is the cat is black. Is the cat black, or do you see it as a gray? Or how do you start to just see different perspectives and start to question the lens you're seeing life through, right? And even start to realize, maybe I'm not a racist person, but being a white privileged woman, I do have an inherent bias and an inherent racism, right? So how do you start to just question? And I think when we can have those conversations with people that are different than us and have different beliefs, when you come from curiosity, that's where you start to have this space to start looking at other perspectives
and have an open mind.
Yeah. And have an open mind and say, and I think what's great is we all, for the most part, want the same things. It's just how we define them, right? People want to be loved. They want to be connected. They want freedom. They want autonomy, and it just looks different for a lot of us.
Absolutely. Interesting. So wanting freedom, love and acceptance and autonomy. So interesting. How have you found that in your life? Where have you seen evidence of that in your life?
Here. Love being accepted, right? Being able to have this freedom to have this conversation, and I think for me, it's really shown up when I'm curious, right? When I'm open to new experiences and, for freedom or even, autonomy has shown up for me in the decisions I've made throughout the way, right? It's saying, hey, maybe these decisions that I want in my life that at my core feel very right for me don't match up to everyone else, but I'm going to stand on my autonomy and my power and my freedom to do that. which can put you at risk for love or, not being accepted. So it's been really interesting to see how that's come up.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. Have you noticed a common thread with the people you've been interviewing on your show? Is there something that speaks to this freedom and this permission to have a new perspective and to find and to like have more introspection into your own understanding of yourself?
Yeah, I think it's creating the connection is two people willing, I think an inherent trust in the other person.
Yeah.
I think that's like what it is, right? Is a trust that like, one of the second guests I had, and this is probably I said it, a really core reason why I started the show is like we met when I would think I was 25, he was 22. I had recently come out. He was a pastor in a super religious church in Oklahoma. We met and I'm like, oh, I really like him. He's like, I really like her. And we would have these lunches together, and we had our other friend Julie, who was Catholic, and we'd have these contracts about religion and homosexuality, and like he had nobody in his life that looked different than him. And he'll say that to this day. And so it was such a good place for us to come with kindness and compassion and curiosity and trust. And I know that I may say something that would offend him, but he had this inherent trust in me that like, it wasn't harmful. It wasn't not harmful. You can't control that, but that trust that we were coming from curiosity to understand and connect, not to criticize. I think and so I think it's people willing to do that so that they can kind of show others what that can look like.
Really cool. Really cool. It's interesting because the first thing I think of is also having that trust in yourself. Right. We were having a conversation earlier before we came on and recorded the podcast. We were imagining what that looks like when you have made decisions in your life, but maybe you're beginning to question the decisions you've made and what that looks like.
Yes.
Yeah. So bring us up to speed a little bit about what we were talking about.
That's good. Yeah. No, we were talking about that. Oh, sorry.
You're good.
We were talking about how, how do you, sometimes we make these decisions that are really, really right for us and they can not feel great.
Yeah.
Or we can make the right decision and it feels really bad. And kind of how do you move past that? Especially, when you start to question these big decisions, it's really easy if everything in your world tells you choose B and you choose A. It's really hard sometimes to stay focused on why you chose A in the first place, right? Like, why did you keep on coming back to that? And I think the importance you said of, especially if you're trying to make a big decision or you've made it and it's real raw, right? And you're like, ooh, it's almost like going through a breakup, right? You break up and then you like get apart and like you kind of start to forget why you made that decision. And then you start to second guess it, right? And you're like, oh yeah, there was a reason I stepped away from that relationship. And I think we do that sometimes with those big decisions that we're really torn on, is we kind of forget the pain or the why we wanted to make that decision. Because it is comfortable before we make it. It feels good, right? Even if it's painful, it's comfortable to do what we've always been doing.
I think it's so interesting, that idea of questioning everything, even the decisions maybe you made with conviction, and what insight that can give you into yourself. And maybe the idea of when we question a decision we've made, does it validate it? Does it give us more confidence in the decision we made? Or does it make us maybe rethink the nuances of that decision? So give me an example in your own life where you've made a decision and then questioned it.
I think there's, a big one for me, and it's really interesting because it's something I'm really passionate about. It's like my wife and I are child-free by choice, right? We did not want kids. It wasn't in our future, or not in our future. We didn't want that in our future. It was just not, it was a purposeful, conscious decision that that's not what we wanted for our life. And I have worked with clients on that. I have like very outspoken. I've written articles. So I'm really passionate. And there's times that I'm like, what if this isn't the right decision? What if it's, I turned 50 in, 8 years, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is it too late? What if, and there are things you see, like, being around your beautiful family, you're like, there's something about that is like, there's a lot of, it is a beautiful thing, so you're like, who am I missing out on that? And then having to stop and come back to like, you're a smart woman who knows what she wants. Like, there's a reason you made that decision, and kind of coming back to that because it is something I 100% believe in, and I can still feel a little bit of sadness around it. Like, I won't have that experience. I won't have certain experiences, and that's a choice I made. So I think that's one that's, I think And as I get older, right? Because then I'm like really nearing past where it'd be really hard. I'm like, ooh, like biologically, that could be a little hard. So I think maybe it's sensing more of a finality, because in your 30s, you're like, yeah, but if I change my mind, I can still like figure out how to make that happen.
What I'm also noticing is like a nuance of it is questioning that insecure feeling, that sadness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Questioning that. So maybe not so much that there's an aspect of questioning your initial decision, but maybe when that new feeling comes up of, wait a minute, how do I really feel about it? Questioning that feeling and a deeper layer, and then gaining that conviction again, kind of a reminder of why you made that first decision.
Yeah, because it is. It's not the decision, it's the feelings I'm now having after a decision, which was somewhat officially, I feel like, again, tomorrow if I change my mind, I can change my mind. Like, it's my life. But, about 5 years ago, I feel like when we were like, okay, this is not what we're doing. But coming back to that moment of why, right? That like noticing that feeling, like, okay, but remember why you were convicted. And, we talked about this earlier, is like staying like plugged into your body on
absolutely
that, right?
Catching that moment of feeling vulnerable or feeling sad and not pushing it down, but allowing yourself to feel it and understand what's underneath it so that you can question and address it.
And just and I think even like stuff will come up that doesn't feel good, like sometimes jealousy, right? Or resentment, those emotions that like we're embarrassed about. Like, you're like, I don't want to admit this, but I'm jealous of so-and-so because they got XYZ, or I envy my business partner because I get to leave, like all those things that we do. And then we're just like, that's not who I am. So I'm gonna like, instead of like coming up, be like, oh yeah, like maybe I am jealous when I see a family together because that's like a moment I'll never have.
Yeah.
Right. And like, it makes sense, and that's okay. And is this still the decision you want to stay with? Yes. Okay. Well then, like, it's okay that you might like see something and be curious if that was something you'd want.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because I think that's something in my past where I've gone high fast. In other words, felt something and then recognized, oh yeah, what's the other perspective? Gone to that higher perspective and then bypassed feeling that emotion, bypassed that sadness or jealousy. Because like you said, I think I've been judging those emotions. So I don't even allow myself to feel them, but I go to the higher perspective too quickly. And so I love that idea of just really staying in touch with when you feel those feelings and allowing yourself to feel them and then understand what's underneath them. Instead of pushing them away.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious for you, when you go high, like you've recognized, which I love that awareness, right? Is you're like, that like, oh yeah, it's great. But you're like, oh wait, maybe I'm bypassing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So how do you now, when you catch yourself like immediately going high, how do you kind of find that balance?
I think what I've noticed, and this goes back to what you were talking about, staying in touch with your body, is I can go high in my head, in my mindset, in my consciousness, but my body speaks to me and tells me, wait a minute, you're missing this emotion.
Yeah.
And sometimes what that feels like for me is urgency, a little bit of maybe anxiety, I guess, but it feels like, oh, I've got to make a decision quickly, or I've got to change my mind quickly, or I've got to come up with something to say quickly.
Yes.
That urgency is a reminder. And that, like, an awareness in your body might be your heart rate quickening, my breath shallowing, my shoulders getting tighter. And then I realize, oh, wait a minute, there's a little urgency that I'm creating here, which is always imaginary. Like, there's very little that's urgent in our lives.
I think otherwise, though.
Yeah. We like to give things a lot of importance, but I think that's what I've noticed is that urgency is a reminder. Oh, I'm bypassing something very quickly. It's still
like simmering, like underneath.
Yeah. And that's essentially what bypassing is, right? We're jumping over something that needs to be addressed. Yeah. So when you ask yourself a question, like what is a question, when you say question everything, what are some of the common questions that you would ask?
Yeah. I'd love to start with like, where did you get that belief? Like where, and I have a worksheet that I, did, especially on Child Free, right? Like, where did that belief come from? Where did you pick it up, right? Like how important is that to you anymore? Because how many times do we do something that we picked up a value that we were 25, right? And we just keep on doing it. And all of a sudden you're like 42 and you're like, wait, is that important to me anymore? Like, so really kind of figuring out. Yeah.
Ooh, I love that. I want to stay there for a
Let's do that.
second.
Let's do it.
So decisions or choices or beliefs that you might have had when you were younger that you're just carrying through without thinking twice, whether it's still valid.
Yeah, think about, I mean, how much do religion, our perspective on health and wellness, like what we think we have, the amount of money we need. Like there's so much of our life that I think we often start with this predetermined decision or belief. And then if you don't really stop to think, or maybe like you said, honor your body, right? You're like, every time I start doing this, it doesn't feel right. Or why am I not doing this? So I think that piece of like, yeah, you start, it's that decision. And then kind of that piece, like you said, is like, where did I even pick that up from?
Oh, so good, because I think that's a superpower in business.
Oh my gosh.
For sure. You know, as a business leader, business owner, we get into these ruts of it's just always been this way.
Yeah.
You know, this is what worked. This is what has. And I think maybe that's where we get trapped is when decisions or habit patterns have worked so well in the past that we don't question them. Yeah. But maybe there's an opportunity for something even greater.
Yeah.
Or in relationships, you know, especially, and I know I've been with my husband for almost 25 years. You and your wife have been together for almost 20. Yeah. There's something in relationships that worked for so long that we don't question it anymore.
Yeah.
But maybe it needs to be questioned.
And in a curious way, right? Like not in a, because I think some people are like, you know, you're questioning me. It feels like a cop, you know, whatever. But it's like in a, way, because it's in business, right? Like the way things have been done may have worked really great up till 2020.
Yeah.
And then like, you're like, why is this not working? We're like, oh my gosh, our entire world has changed.
True.
Right. And it may have worked for yourself till then, your business partner, your parent, or, your mentor, but it just doesn't work. And so giving yourself the freedom to change, and not because it's bad or wrong, is so important. Because I think we do, especially as like business owners and entrepreneurs, and it's like, but it's worked really well. And then like, what if it doesn't work moving forward? But just starting that place of curiosity.
Yeah. I love it. Even in career paths.
Yes.
Maybe you've been in a career for decades and maybe it's okay to question it.
Yeah. How do you give yourself permission to question things?
Oh, it's a great question. I think one of the things that you said was the word curiosity has a quality of levity to it. Which gives you permission, right? If it's not so serious. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
There's no ulterior motive. There's no ultimatum or outcome that I'm dependent on. So that feels permissive. Just
because it's not there's no outcome. You're just curious.
Right. I like that word. I think that gives you some permission when you say, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Even because I'm thinking now in the lens of a relationship, right? Because that feels heavy, right? When you're in a marriage, in something that you have a lot of value in, the stakes are high. Just having the permission to be curious about something feels like light and effortless. Like I'm not too dependent on whether we make the same decision or not. That feels permissive.
Yeah, totally. And I think, even as you're saying this up, it's like curious, and like, there's nothing wrong with asking for permission. Whether it's a business partner, a colleague, a partner, a kid, like, are you open for us to discussing about like how we're going to pay off our $20,000 worth of debt? Okay. Yeah. Well, like, I'm curious what it could look like for us to pay off our debt in 2 years, or, whatever that conversation looks like, or if it's bigger about kids, like asking for the permission and coming from curiosity it doesn't feel punitive. Right.
Yeah.
Cause I think, we start, you've been married. How much has your relationship changed in the past 25 years?
Absolutely. Right? We're different people.
You're like different, it's like having that conversation and I've had so many conversations a lot with moms when they start having kids and like the roles shift.
Oh, right? Yeah. As kids get older.
Yeah. As kids get older, or maybe they're both like working parents and then, the woman's like staying home, I'm like, have you talked about redefining your roles and coming to that mutually mutually agreeable role of what that looks like? Because sometimes, I think so. The asking for permission is huge.
Yeah, it reminds me a couple of years ago, my partner in the orthodontic practice and we were questioning the hours that we keep. Like forever, we were seeing patients till 5:30, and once again, just having permission to ask the question, we challenged it a little bit. Do we have to see patients till 5:30 every day? And what ended up happening is we took a summer of stopping a little bit sooner so we could have the evening with our kids and see our kids at their soccer games or whatever. And then it just stayed. And it was not a problem. But we'd had this old narrative for some reason that we needed to see patients until 5:30, something that had worked for us for a long time, but just by questioning it allowed us to see it differently.
And work better for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that the permission is important, especially in a relationship.
Yes, because typically if you're having a conversation where you feel like you're questioning something, something's probably going to change a little, right? Or people need to be open to the thought of it changing, and which can be really uncomfortable, especially in relationships, right? Depending on whether it's about like anything in a relationship. If you're wanting to change the paradigm, somebody's probably going to feel really uncomfortable. So how do you create that safety?
And we're right back at trust.
Right back at trust.
Yeah. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. That's interesting. I was going to say, I wonder if another part about giving yourself permission to question something is actually asking yourself for permission. Questioning, have I given myself permission to see this differently?
Yeah.
Even just that question is a great one because maybe the answer is yes, I have, and I've already decided.
Which is a great thing to know too.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Because I mean, if we don't, because sometimes when we start to question, I think Eli, who was one of my guests, and the pastor that that knew in Oklahoma, and he was like, if I started to question this piece of my life, my religion, that like was the biggest piece of my whole life, what else am I like? What else is not right for me?
So his question to himself was, can I question religion?
Yeah. Like, what does that do? It's my identity. It's who I am. Like, this is like, I've preached this. I've been a minister. And like, if I'm like starting to question, if my beliefs aren't 100% correct, like what else is there not there? Which is hard.
It's very hard. So just having the realization that that is difficult is an important piece of information. I see what you're saying.
Because, and like you said, it's just the permission, because we don't allow ourselves sometimes to go back and question, because I think we're scared of like regret or resentment. And so we're just like, no, that's like where I'm, question decisions, right? But it's always, if it keeps on coming up, it's good to go back and be like, okay, well, what was that? Why did I make that decision? So I kind of like sidetracked to a different topic in my head. It was like streamlined. But, just talking about how, you make these decisions, and sometimes you can kind of go back and be like, ooh, was that the right one? Just kind of going back and staying true, because otherwise you'll always be questioning, but not like reviewing.
And I wonder, is it okay if sometimes the answer is, I don't know?
Sometimes. I think sometimes.
Yeah. Give me your perspective on that.
My perspective is that I don't know it's like it's a safety net answer, right?
Maybe
if I don't know, I don't have to make a decision to leave my marriage. If I don't know, I don't have a decision to, quit my job and start something. If I don't know, like, I just don't know. So,
so it protects you from actually knowing the truth.
Yeah.
It's a resistance, a form of resistance.
Absolutely. Right. Because if I don't know, then like I can't do anything. I can't sit in indecision. I can't sit in like the I don't knows. Or you do sit in in those,
Yeah.
So, and then I do think there are times that I think, here, you just like,
in your heart.
Yeah. I believe. Because I believe we like can trust ourselves. Like and there may be some excavation.
So what advice would you give to someone who says, I just don't know? I really don't know. So let's paint a portrait for a moment.
Oh, okay.
Somebody is questioning, has the courage to question, did I go into the right profession?
Yeah.
I've been in this profession for 20 years. Did I make a mistake? And then the answer that they come up with is, I don't know. So how would you coach them to excavate that a little bit more?
I think, like, if you're coaching this question is coming to me and like talking to like kind of the process is like, why, like at this time, why is it important to know if you've made a mistake or not?
Yeah.
Like what, because I think you hear that a lot, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot like, did I choose the right job? And why does that matter right now? You can't get back those 20 years, right? I think the better question is like, what do you want? Because we can spend so much energy saying, did I do the right thing? I don't know. I could have been I could have opened a flower store. I could have been a teacher. I could have been an artist. And you're like, did I make it? And so we sit in that
Judgmental
judgment
place.
and we sit there as opposed to saying, you know what, if I have the courage to change this day, which is all I can do, what does that look like?
Yeah.
So, and there is some healing I think that needs to be done, right? But I think a lot of times we can spend that energy on, did I make the right decision? As opposed to going back to say, you know what, I did open this dental practice because I loved it at this time. And it was a family present, I loved helping kids and I loved it for the first 15 years. And that's great. And now I'm going to get to do something different.
And maybe the questioning comes in, why do I think I have to keep doing the same thing going forward? Why do I think I don't have the permission to make a new choice?
Yeah. And who do you need that permission from? Like, who is that? Is it, we know it's us at the end of the day, but in our mind, like, who is that we need that permission from?
Love it.
Because I think we start to ask ourselves the wrong questions, and it's like, what kind of thinking through, what is it you're searching for? Right. Like, what does this fulfill it? And it's like, that I love that you brought this up, that questioning, it's a safe place. Like, nobody has to know sometimes, right? I tell people that all the time. You don't have to go tell your boss, like, I'm questioning if I want to stay in this. Like, nobody, so like, explore it, journal it, talk about it, like, hire a coach, hire a therapist, right? Like, it's okay to question things and not tell the other person until you kind of feel a little bit more confident.
Yeah.
Because I think we think that sometimes.
I love that. I think a lot of what we're saying is giving yourself permission when you feel that questioning to listen to it, to follow through with it. If there's an urge or a whisper that's speaking to you and not letting go, allowing yourself to explore it.
Yeah. Because there's a reason there's an inkling there, right?
Yeah.
Like, we know that. Just the permission. It's like, it's funny when I tell people they're looking for jobs, right? And like, but if I don't need a job till this date, or I don't, and it's like, or I don't know if this is the job I want, I'm like, you don't have to take it. You can interview with 100 different companies and you can get to the final round. You can get 100 offers and you never have to leave your job. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, explore, have fun. If you're thinking of leaving, selling your practice, and what would that look like? And then you decide you don't ever have to do it. And that's great. Or you decide to do it and that's great too. But we don't give ourselves permission just to say, like, what if?
What if? Yeah.
Like, what if?
So I'm curious, what are you questioning now in your life? Like, is there anything that's on being questioned?
Oh, I love it. I am questioning my, I think my involvement in more political issues.
Ooh. So have you been traditionally involved, or are you thinking of becoming more involved?
I'm becoming more involved. And so that's something I'm questioning, like, what does that look like in my life? Is it even something I want? So I'm entertaining. I'm questioning, kind of curious, because I think we're needing more women to stand up and do things. We have Grace, who's a kind of, I think you've met Grace through a mutual kind of group we're in. She ran for Senate out of, state Senate in Iowa, like, because she's like, we need more women. And so I've just been inspired and thinking through, if not us, who?
I love it.
So kind of questioning, is that something?
I love that. I love that.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
What are you questioning?
Something that I'm questioning right now.
Excuse me.
I think I'm always questioning parenting. I'm always questioning decisions I make with parenting. And I think that I actually really love that about myself, that I'm constantly questioning my parenting, because I think for me, that makes me feel passionate and involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost gives me a little bit of safety net because I'm constantly wanting to understand more, know more, questioning if I've made the right decision. It makes me feel like even if I've made a mistake, I've thought it through and I've at least given
Yeah.
myself opportunity to think
Yeah.
differently and not just been reactive.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the challenging things is when we become so habituated in decision-making patterns,
Mm-hmm.
it almost becomes reactive, meaning
Yeah.
not thinking, meaning
Mm-hmm.
like reflexive, like something happens and you have a reflex action,
Yeah.
reaction, as opposed to a really thoughtful response.
Mm.
So I think I'm always questioning my parenting.
Well, it's like, how would we grow if we didn't question things?
Yeah.
Right. So, like, for you as a parent, like, who you're parenting, your 3 kids are probably different, totally different. And it's like, if you're not always like, I don't know, would I do that again? Did that
Yeah.
work? Like,
I have to say that as we're talking about it from a parenting perspective, along with questioning needs to come a lot of self-forgiveness. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
If we're making a new decision that's different from the past.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
questioning this decision as a parent, but I chose the opposite 3 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
giving myself grace for the
Yes.
decisions I've made in the past.
Because and thank you for bringing that. That's like so important because one, like that was 3 years ago, Taryn, who didn't know what she knows now. Right. Like
Right.
you shouldn't make that same decision.
Right.
It's like going like that self-forgiveness is huge. And that self-forgiveness to say, like, 20 years later, I don't want to do this. And that you weren't doing it wrong before. Like, I think that's what we think, right? And you're like, you may have never gotten to this position to want to do something different if you wouldn't have spent those 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, and we beat ourselves up and you're like, you're like, you're not, the blame's on yourself. And it's, and yeah, we're not, and it's so funny, but people ask my regret and I only have like one regret that I could like that feels like a regret. And it's not even that big of one. So I lived in New York City when I was like out of college and I moved back too quick. Back to like, I got a job. Well, I got a great job and I loved my job in Oklahoma, but I left for a job, but I also left for kind of like a relationship. And like, that's like the only thing I regret because I remember like it didn't feel right.
You left New York too soon.
Yeah, I left New York too soon. I'd always wanted to live there. And I was like, I didn't give it like enough time.
Oh, interesting.
And I say that because like, when you say you look back on the 20 years in my practice, did I regret it? Right. Like I say that because like, I don't regret much because I always go back to who I was at that time. I was young. I didn't like know I was like, there was a piece of like getting a good job, so it's like, I can't sit there and blame myself for that long ago. And I think we do that, as business owners, entrepreneurs are like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then you spend all this time, I should have done that, or I should have chose a different path. And and just reminding yourself, like, who was I when you envision yourself and you were 22 and what you knew of the world was 20 years ago, coming back to that version of yourself and being like, oh yeah, that makes sense that I got into this profession or that I married this person or that I like, it's, you can't go back. And we know that, but.
And because you can't go back, you shouldn't not allow yourself to go forward.
Yeah.
Because I think that is one of when you mentioned doesn't questioning everything allow us to progress? Don't you need questioning for progress? I think the one thing that holds us back is avoiding new decisions because we feel bad about the past ones. We want to hold so tightly onto the vindication of our decisions.
And I wonder if that comes from just we don't like to be wrong typically as humans, right? We don't like to, I don't know anybody that likes to be wrong.
Yeah.
So like at our core is like, now people are going to think I made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
Because I changed my mind or that it's all for nothing. There's a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
Like I spent 20 years, if I quit my practice and I go open up a flower store, it was all for nothing. Instead of looking like, oh my gosh, look at that. Like 20 years, like thousands of patients you served, like the impact you made, like the stability you created for your family. Like you forget about that and you're like, it was all for nothing. You're like, oh my goodness, it was like 20 years of like amazing times.
Yep.
And nobody will ever take that away. And then what comes next?
Is there ever a time that questioning something is detrimental?
That's a good question. I would like to say maybe if it's, I think when you come from curiosity, it's really hard.
Yeah. When you give yourself permission to just question, it should always be permissive.
Permanent curiosity. And I think, maybe if it is, if the worst case scenario is like you're in an abusive relationship and you're questioning and you go back or something, right? But that's like, I think there are instances, but I think when you come from curiosity and compassion, like it's okay. And I think I would say it's not good if you start to question yourself or question what you know to be true. But we talked about that too. That can be really hard for people to like locate. When we start to question ourselves when we know our truth. And I think that, which is work, it's awareness, it's stuff that I'm just, stepping into, over the past couple of years. So we're not, we're born with it, but we're not taught to use it.
It's definitely a muscle that you strengthen with use.
And then you're like, this is cool. I like this muscle.
Listening to yourself.
Right?
Yeah.
But I don't know that it can be if it's from a curious place or, I've had a lot of people question things about being gay or like married, or, not having kids or other decisions, but like almost 100% of the time they've been from a place of just not understanding or true curiosity. Right. So for me, that's like an engaging, I will always share with somebody who comes with like curious, because I would like the same respect for stuff that I'm not educated on or know about. So I think if you can kind of stay at those core, like, and connection, right? Like being curious about somebody and learning is like such an amazing way to connect.
Yeah.
It's the only way to connect.
Absolutely.
Right. It's just like, so I think there's so many, I know you do this work with your clients, like kind of how the only thing that's bad is if you're just starting to question your
worth.
Truth. Yeah. And your worth.
Your truth and your worth.
And that can ruminate for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, curiosity has so many valuable qualities to it because curiosity also speaks of life, of living this life of happiness, really.
Yeah.
Because when you're curious about something, it keeps you engaged. Yeah. It keeps you interested.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in relationships or business, careers, when we start to lose that sparkle, when things feel mundane and rote and boring, it's because maybe we've forgotten the curiosity spark. I know that's true in relationships, or I've seen that in my personal relationships. When something's feeling a little bit old, just asking a question, I wonder how, or I wonder if this would, or just remaining curious brings back that spark and that life again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. And I think too, is like that curious is letting your ego go too.
Letting your ego go.
To be like, how many times you're like, this is really embarrassing. Like you meet somebody and you're like, I have no idea what you do as an orthodontist. Right. And so you're like, should I know that? I don't ask that question, but just being open and be like, tell me more about what you do. I don't understand this, or just saying, I don't know anything about that. Like, but you have to let some of that ego go, right? Because sometimes you're like, should I know? Can I know? Can I ask that question?
Vulnerability.
The vulnerability of not knowing, or in a workplace, right? And you're just, you've been an entrepreneur, business owner for 20 years, and you're like, I don't want people to think I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, that's so good, especially when it comes to challenging conversations. Yes. So when we talk about things like choosing not to have children, I think we'll stay away from those conversations sometimes because we're afraid to be vulnerable, not to know.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting that you welcome curious questions when it's coming from a place of compassion and trust, even if it's an uncomfortable conversation? Yeah,
because I know the motive is to like learn. Or like hopefully understand, right? Or even JoJo I had, and she's like, and a Black woman. I'm like, I was so nervous for that conversation.
To have a conversation with an African American woman.
And I know her, I trust her, she trusts me. But like, and I told her afterwards, I was like, JoJo, I was sweaty, because I'm like, what is it like to be a Black woman? I didn't want to use the wrong words. I didn't want to like say something I should know. And this is like a totally safe place with her. And so it was that thought of, okay, well, let that go. She trusts you, you trust her. It's a place of connection. You're just your intention is just to like learn and understand. But I had to during this be like, give myself that, like during the talk, it's like, it's fine. Because you don't want to offend or you don't want to embarrass yourself.
Have you noticed as you've been doing this journey through your TV show that it's getting easier to be curious? Like, are you getting more comfortable with that discomfort of asking difficult questions?
Yeah. The thing I have not done yet is had somebody come on that like we are polar opposites on a certain topic. And that is like my next kind of goal.
What is the topic? Or is
I'm sure it would be like religion. I
Mm.
feel like that's most polarizing, but I'd love to have a, you know, that we all do right in this day and age, right? You have this like triggering conversation. Like, how do you do that in a way where maybe I can say curious to somebody that I don't agree with and what that could look like.
Love it. Love it. That's so exciting. So what do you have coming up that we can look forward to? First of all, let me remind you again how to find Holly on YouTube. Question everything. So if we just look it up on YouTube, we'll find it. Awesome. And we can follow you. What are your social media sites?
Instagram is Holly Krivo.
Krivo.
Yes, here we shorten it because it's very long. The website's hollykrivo.com.
Awesome.
That's kind of where I try and spend my time. And I'm trying out TikTok, but I'm not gonna get that out yet because it's still new. It's a young man's game, but I'm having fun.
I love it. And so what's coming up? What's coming up on Question Everything?
So we've got another child-free person coming on, which will be fun to talk about that decision. I'm working on a couple with religion because that's a topic that I'm really curious about. One of my friends used to be a pastor, very hype, and it kind of dropped everything so totally kind of switched having that conversation of what does that look like to deconstruct the way we were born with religion. I'm gonna have you on.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you.
So yeah, and then like I said, I think my next goal is to kind of start having those conversations in a curious and compassionate way with individuals on topics that make me uncomfortable. Right.
Love it.
So it's good. Good stuff.
And so I also have to ask you, because I ask this of all my guests, what is your definition of happiness?
Oh my God. I was like ready for this, but I cannot pinpoint. It's like such a good question. I was like, you like know it's coming. And you're like, oh, for me, happiness is freedom. To me, it is family and friends and ease. Like that's when happiness comes for me.
Love that.
But thank you for bringing happiness.
Thank you.
To the business. So
thank you for seriously for everything. Thank you for so many things. I'm going to get emotional, but especially for bringing Question Everything. I think it's such a great premise. It's such a great mission. And I think it's such a great, something we really need permission for ourselves and for each other.
Thank you for that. Yeah. That's a big, wide permission to slip to everybody.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. And thank you so much to all of you for joining us here on the Business of Happiness today. And remember, when you feel good is when you can do good. Bye-bye.